Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be slightly different. I'm going to narrate it because I didn't have time to do any pieces to camera while I was actually on location. But every year I photograph the red deer rut, and this year was no different. And I had a fantastic few days up at Richmond Park. Some of the pictures and the footage I took was great. It was great to watch and great to film. I've got a very short red deer rut, and then I had two fallow deer, and they were fighting and rutting for about 10 minutes, and the picture taking opportunities was absolutely brilliant. So I've got that. We've got the deer roaring into the mist. It was just a great 3 or 4 days. So I'm going to talk you through some of the stills and some of the videos, and also talk about some of the camera settings and how best to photograph red deer during the rutting season. So the best time to photograph the red deer rut is, I would say, in the UK, certainly where I am down in the south of England, between the 1st and 2nd week of October. It's a good time, there's lots of action, and also, I tend to find the light can be quite nice. If you get a good day, you can have a little bit of mist in the mornings, low directional sunlight, so it's really nice. Now, when it comes to camera settings, early in the morning I normally shoot at 1/500th of a second, because I find that's fast enough to avoid camera shake and subject movement. But when the light levels are low, it means we're not going super fast. As the light levels lift up, I generally push the shutter speed up to about 1,000th of a second, but that early morning, around about 500th of a second. And sometimes if I'm on a tripod with a gimbal head or a fluid head, maybe I'll drop to a 250th of a second, but you need to have really steady hands and make sure there's no wobbling about on the tripod. So ideally 500th of a second to start with, up to 1,000th of a second, because later on in the day they might sort of just start chasing one another, and that faster shutter speed enables you to get really sharp pictures. Generally early on I'm shooting wide open, so the aperture will be as wide as it can be, because we want to get as much light into the lens as possible, and that means we get the lowest ISO possible, which results in less noise. And you get image noise when you shoot with very high ISO numbers, which you have to sometimes, because we've got sometimes a fast moving subject, low light situations. Once the aperture's wide open, we need a certain shutter speed to freeze that motion, so we just have to put up with a slightly higher ISO. But as I say, I tend to start at a 500th of a second and then push the shutter speed up a little bit once the light levels have got a bit higher during the day or during the morning. Now, as we're shooting wildlife, it's a moving subject, so I tend to shoot with continuous focusing, and either a single AF point or a group of autofocus points. Now, if you're lucky enough to have animal eye detect, then it's definitely worth putting that on, because that eye detect should follow the red deer or the fallow deer, whichever deer it is you're photographing. It should follow its eye around the frame, so it'll track it automatically, which is absolutely brilliant. Although I did see with some of the people I spoke to, if the eyes become a little bit covered with bracken, so it's the eyes of the animal are not really easily spotted, then sometimes the eye detect was picking up the nose instead, because it looks a little bit like an eye, I suppose. So watch out for that. You don't want to be picking up the nose instead of the eye. But in general, if you've got animal eye tracking, it's worth using it for red deer or the fallow deer during the rut. Now, although I was photographing at Richmond Park, which is in effect a deer park in London, these animals are wild, and if you go to the right places, you've got woodland, you've got heathland. It's like a completely natural environment. You would not know you're in West London. But they are still wild animals, so you need to treat them with respect, especially during the deer rut. So don't get too close. Give them have a respectful distance away, and you need to sort of start to keep an eye on their behaviour. One thing you don't want is another deer behind you. So if you've got a group of hinds and a stag, and one of those hinds was to break free and then come round behind you, then that would be a really bad position to be in, because you're in between a stag and maybe one of its hinds. So in which case you move out the way reasonably quickly. Don't panic, but just move out the way. So always keep an eye on what's going on behind you. Now, if you're stalking deer out in the countryside, you've obviously got to be really quiet. You've got to stay downwind of them so your scent doesn't reach those deer. Make sure you don't break the horizon, and probably wear lots of camo as well. Somewhere like Richmond Park, although the deer are totally wild, they are used to people, so you don't need to be all camoed up. And it's a great way to practice wildlife photography. I know some people, you know, sort of sneer at things like deer parks and hides, paid hides sometimes, but it's a great way to get some really good practice for wildlife photography. And what you do is you just watch the behaviour. There's so much behaviour going on, and because the deer are there and you can stay with them over a long period of time, you get to notice things that you wouldn't necessarily notice if you were stalking them out and, say, you know, out in the wild somewhere. So I think it's, you know, both options are totally valid. I love being out stalking deer, totally in the wild, but I also love watching the deer's behaviour and all those little intricate bits of behaviour, and you get more chance to do that in somewhere like Richmond Park or Bushy Park, or I think there's a place up in Leicestershire which is really good as well. So definitely don't rule it out is my advice. It's a great fun thing to do. Red deer are our biggest species of deer in this country, and they're big animals. They weigh up to 190 kilograms, and they're big, bulky animals, very strong. So that's why you have to give them a lot of respect. And they normally start breeding after about 5 years old, and it's not very often you see a deer rut, because these animals, as I say, are big and powerful and they don't really want to fight. So what you tend to get is obviously all the roaring and the bellowing first, and that's a way for them to assess each other's strength. And then the next stage will be something called parallel walking, and that's where they walk parallel to each other. And again, they're assessing the strength of their opponent. And only then, if they feel they're equally matched, will you get a deer rut. And that's where they go, you know, lock antlers, and they start trying to push and overpower each other. And the reason they don't do that very often is they've got very sharp antlers, they're very strong, and, you know, deer do die during the rutting season. So the actual rut is a last resort. They live up to, unless, you know, they get badly injured in the wild, they live up to about 18 years old. So, you know, they're not massively long-lived, but fantastic creatures to watch. Fallow deer are much smaller than red deer, and also they've got a different shaped antlers. They're much flatter and less sharp. So as I said, I think I might have mentioned, when they do start rutting, it can last for a long time because there's not such a danger that they're going to badly injure each other. And I've seen ruts last up to 10 minutes, which you don't generally get with the red deer. Again, as I say, they're smaller, up to about 93 kilograms, and they live slightly less long than the red deers, you know, roughly about 16 years old. But as I say, they're smaller, but they look really beautiful. The actual markings on, you know, on the fur is fantastic. And when they do have a fight, even though they're a much smaller deer, it still can be very, very dramatic, and again, well worth a watch. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, if you have enjoyed it, if you can think about subscribing, if you haven't already, that would be great. And if you have enjoyed it, if you can give it a like, a thumbs up, that always helps my channel. And then last but not least, if you've got any great experiences of the deer rut this year, or any year in the past, then just drop them in the comment section below. It's always great to hear what you're all up to. So thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you on the next one. Bye for now, guys.